Hi, I'm Chris,
And I'm Eli.
and we are the Landlord Gurus. We've been managing our own rental property for decades now, and we've created this show to share our experiences, tips, and best practices we've refined over the years. Thanks for joining us, whether you found us on YouTube or our podcast or at landlordgurus.com. Before we get started, just a reminder to like, share, and subscribe so you'll get notified when we put out new content.
Hi, everyone. You have Landlord Gurus here. I'm Eli, and that's Chris.
Hey, everyone.
And thanks for joining us for another episode. Whether you're finding us on YouTube or Spotify or wherever else you might be listening to our podcast, please remember to like and subscribe so you get notified the next time we put out an episode. And of course, if there's anybody you know who might be interested, please share as well. Today, we're going to be talking about rent control. We live in Seattle, so Washington State has just recently passed a rent control law for the very first time since it was actually outlawed in the early 1980s. So there has been activity around this for many years. People have been advocating for rent control, but it has failed to get through the legislature until this year. So the broad strokes of what rent control in Washington is a 7% per year cap plus whatever the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is for any given year. And that's announced once a year by, I don't know, Chris, is that the board of
I don't know exactly who does it, but yeah. So I think that's supposed to be coming out, or it's probably out as of early June 2025, which would then be applied for the rent increases for next year, 2026, I believe.
Anything to go into effect for next year, I guess, in 2026, right? Yeah,
exactly.
So,
and with the caveat being that no matter what the CPI index is, the maximum increase is 10% that you can charge.
Right, whichever is lower.
Right.
It's 10% or at a maximum, or 7% plus CPI. So if CPI is 1%, then you can only raise it by 8%, for example.
Exactly.
Along with that, Washington changed the rules for giving notice of a rent increase, and they made some very specific laws about the language that has to be used on the forms. So in order to make it official, this is a great reason, we harp on this, but this is a great reason to belong to RHAWA here in Washington, or often, the local rental housing associations are really a valuable resource because they'll provide you with forms and guidance about, staying abreast of things and doing things properly per the laws of your location. So we'll be using the RHA form whenever we do this. And they're actually also requiring that the notice be given in the same fashion as if you were going to go serve notice of eviction or some other legal notice to a tenant. It's no longer acceptable to email or even simply send a piece of mail, or, certainly not just verbally. You actually now have to go and post this very specific form on somebody's store if you're not able to hand it to them in person. So it's personal delivery can be done by a process server, but you need to take a copy for everyone that lives at the property, individual copies, take it there, attempt to deliver it in person. And if you can't deliver it in person, then you have to tape it unfolded face out to the door of the unit. So neither of us have been through this yet. I don't know, Chris, have you ever served anybody notice in this fashion at all? You probably never.
Not in this fashion, no. And not for rent increase notices either. But and we will put the links to the new rules and the new law, right? Put the full text of the new law, links to the full text in the description.
Yeah.
For the video and the podcast, so you can check it out for yourself, because it is complicated and there's a lot of stuff going on. I know that Eli, you've been to a couple seminars discussing this, and it's still, sounds like there's still maybe some questions out there, and the recommendations are generally to err on the safe side, which I think is probably pretty smart.
Yeah.
And it really behooves you to kind of learn and see for yourself what that law says, so that you can try and get the help that you need.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whether it's an RHA or a local, landlord tenant lawyer, because, somebody who practices landlord tenant law. And it's increasingly important to have somebody that you can go to when you have questions, because it's increasingly damaging to make mistakes. So in this case, the penalties are fairly significant for doing it wrong. If you don't do the process correctly, the judgment against you can be that any amount that you have raised the rent. So let's say you raise it, $50 a month. If 2 years down the road, you are found to not have done that correctly, not today, then you have to pay back that amount that's been paid, that $50 for every one of those months that it's been paid, plus up to 3 times that amount in damages to the tenant, punishment, effectively.
Right.
And Washington's also given it real teeth with, they have charged the Attorney General with enforcing these laws, and the Attorney General can fine a landlord or a property manager who makes a mistake or does things improperly for one way or another, with a $7,500 fine per violation. So
It remains to be seen how they're gonna do this and how it's gonna play out, in real life. Obviously, they may not be able to go after every single thing out there, and so we'll see how that ends up going, and who they choose to go after or how they choose to do that. I don't know, but it seems to me like first things you would try and enforce and go after is people who are trying to raise the rent greater than the cap that you're allowed to do. Before a lot of the process things, but you never know.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
we'll see.
RHAWA is recommending right now, and they may have changed this since the CPI number came out, but they were recommending in the seminars I went to that you stick with a 7 because at least, in the spirit of kind of playing it safe, that you not go beyond 7 for this year while everything shakes out and while we, get some clarity on what's the real number that's allowed at any given point in time. The other thing that changed in this law is that the notice period, the required notice period was changed. It was 60 days statewide. Now it's 90 days statewide. It does not change places like Seattle or Tacoma where the notice requirement was already longer than that. So
Right. Sounds like cities still have the ability to make their own rules regarding timelines and things like that.
Timelines, but cities are not allowed to add additional rent control measures, is my understanding. So they can't introduce an additional or a separate rent cap. They can't say, oh no, in Seattle,
They can't make it, 5%.
they can't make it 5%,
like that, right?
Right. Yeah.
No.
So, and backing up just one bit, there are provisions for how a tenant who has identified a problem needs to notify the landlord. So there's room for correction if you make a mistake and then your tenant says, "Oh, hey, no, this isn't right." They need to notify you of that. You're not immediately in peril. There's room to correct that. I don't believe that if you make a mistake and then it doesn't get called to attention for 2 years, I think the remedy for that is to roll the rent back to the point of the mistake and repay whatever was improperly charged. So, and in some ways, if it doesn't get called out right off the bat, then, you can get yourself into kind of a bind down the road. So,
Right.
That's the messaging from RHA is do it right. And, I certainly, endorse that. I mean, and I have to say, Chris, you brought up like pros and cons, when we were chatting just before, like what are the pros and cons of this? And some people have experienced really high rent increases over the years, and to the extent that it's
Especially in some of these cities like Seattle where, there are housing shortages, and the result is that there have been a lot of people left, in limbo, without housing in many cases. And so, I mean, this is we've talked about this before. It's maybe not, the fairest form of trying to alleviate the housing shortage. It's, there are many, many different causes of this. And, by putting the onus on landlords to restrict rent is, maybe not the right answer on some games.
It does
but,
precisely nothing to fix the housing shortage.
No.
It
but it may, it may help people retain housing.
Yeah.
They might otherwise lose it. And that's a real problem here in Seattle. So,
yeah.
Whether you agree or disagree, I guess at this point it's already been done. So, as far as the rent caps. So it's a matter of trying to, kind of deal with it at this point moving forward. Now we know. That was kind of a big thing before, is there was not a lot of certainty around, both for the tenants in terms of what their rent might be from year to year, but also in terms of what, for landlords, like what the rules are and what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if nothing else, that we do have a little bit of clarity. And, I think like any business, things change, rules change, regulations change. So, I guess you can get out, or you can try and adapt and make things work, so that you're still able to succeed in being a landlord. It's harder now, but I think people will survive.
Yeah.
People will do it.
Yeah. You just,
not everyone will.
Right.
But
some people will sell, it's definitely.
But like, no, that's like in any business, right? Any restaurant doesn't make it. Price of food goes up, price of labor goes up, whatever it is.
Yeah. Things get harder.
And some don't make it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's definitely a call to, tighten up operations, I think. This, along with many of the other landlord-tenant laws that have been passed over the last few years. And there are good things about it, that you develop processes where you're methodical about, having really good lease documents to begin with. So that lease that, got torn out of the Landlording for Dummies book, 12 years ago and 20 years ago, and it's been photocopied ever since, is not,
with handwritten notes on the margins, things
not
like
okay.
That. That's not going to fly.
No, you really need a tight lease that, that's very specific about what tenants need to do in order to continue to qualify to be your tenants. Because if it's loosey-goosey and you've got no leverage when, people are not really taking care of the property or doing what they're supposed to do, then with laws like this, and especially with the just cause eviction laws here in Seattle, it's not just Seattle anymore either. They're effectively, this is a separate topic, but they're effectively kind of like month-to-month leases where you're required to offer an extension. So you're required to offer an extension. Now there's a limit on how much you can raise it at any extension. And also, let's note, part of this law is that they've also outlawed any increase in rent in the first 12 months of a tenancy. And also, there can be no more than one increase in rent for every 12 months.
Per year.
Right. So I take that to mean that you shouldn't probably, well, I guess if you're on a regular schedule, let's say, June 30th, is your expiration. In December, you should be giving notice for the 6 months, So notice once in December, increase in June, but you can't do any more than that. So.
Right. You can raise it again 12 months from it.
Well, the next notice, it would be the next December.
The next December, yeah. So 6 months from then, 6 months from now, you would give a new notice for increase, and then 6 months after that, and you would actually increase again.
Right.
But yes,
right.
That's how I take it to mean as well. And then I was just going to say, there's other rules around this, for regarding mobile home parks, and there's other exceptions and exemptions, the properties that new construction,
under 12
for
years.
the first 12 years, 12 years is exempt from this as well. So you can, check out the laws and see what applies to you and what might not apply to you.
Yeah.
But,
manufactured housing is a flat 5%. So.
And then along the same lines, you're talking about leases, but I'd say also do your tenant screening. I think that is, that's going to help you as well, protect you down the road. And we've talked about this before, screen, and, do pre-screening, get your questions out there pre-made, get them posted in criteria or when you send out the listing.
Check references.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, possibly the most important part of tenant screening.
Yeah, get those pay stubs, their documentation, all that, verify it, make sure that all fits in your criteria, and then hopefully that just, just goes a long ways towards making sure that your property is protected and that you're protected.
Yeah, and we've written lots of articles on how to screen. There are lots of tools for ordering screening reports now. Some property management software will even automatically emails the rental references that are listed by the applicant. So there are lots of tools.
We've got a whole chapter of this in our Landlording A to Z class on tenant screening.
Good segue.
And another whole chapter on leases, and chapter on legal issues. So yeah, it's a lot of it's covered in there. I can check that out.
I think all of it's covered in there pretty well. All of it is. Yeah.
Exactly.
We've put together the entire course that goes through kind of each step of the way to each task in managing rental property. And we've kind of laid out best practices, the things that we've learned over time. And so in the spirit of kind of tightening up your game, we'd love it if you go check that out. And,
and a lot of that will apply to you, even if you're in a place that doesn't have rent control.
Oh yeah.
Again. And so it's useful we find for all landlords, whether you're a brand new landlord or you've been doing it for a while, you just might need an update on some best practices and just some general reminders about things. It's kind of got it all. Yeah. And then we're available for one-on-one coaching if that's something you would like to do as well. And it's all via Zoom.
There'll be links,
but it's
links in the notes to that, to all this.
So if that's something that you're interested in, if you'd rather not sit through a class and learn through it, you'd rather just ask us some questions.
Right.
That's a possibility as well. So
and the intro on that is free. We do a meet and greet, where we listen to what your situation is and what questions you have, and then we let you know whether we have the expertise to help you with it, and if so, then we'll kind of recommend a course of like a session or sessions to answer your questions. So
exactly. Great. So why don't we leave you with that? Whether you're going through rent control or not. If you are, definitely learn the rules, update your practices, make sure you tighten up the ship.
Yeah. So please remember to like, subscribe, share, all that business. And if you have any comments or questions, please drop us a note either here or on the site. And we'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much for watching.